Right now, somewhere inside the United States military's classified operations network, an AI model is helping plan a war. It's analyzing intelligence, running battle scenarios, helping identify targets. That model is Claude, built by a company that, days before those strikes were authorized, was declared a threat to national security by the United States government. Same model, same company, enemy of the state, and tool of the state simultaneously. Now here's what I want you to hold on to for the rest of this video. There is one phrase, 7 words, buried deep inside a government contract that started all of this. 7 words the Pentagon wanted deleted. 7 words Dario and Amodei refused to remove. And once you see what they are, everything that happened next will make complete sense. We'll get there. But first, you need to understand what kind of company Anthropic was supposed to be. A group of senior researchers at OpenAI decide they've had enough, not because the AI is bad, because they believe the company is moving too fast, prioritizing growth over safety, and isn't taking the risks seriously enough, so they leave. Dario Amodei, VP of Research at OpenAI, walks out with his sister Daniela and a handful of colleagues. They build Anthropic, and the pitch is simple. We are the responsible alternative. They develop something called constitutional AI, a framework designed to make Claude harder to misuse, harder to weaponize, harder to turn into something dangerous. The irony, that positioning is exactly what gets them the Pentagon contract. By 2024, Claude becomes the first major AI model deployed inside US classified government networks, a $200 million DoD deal, the safety-first company inside the most dangerous apparatus in the world. And for a while, it works, until it doesn't. When reports surface that Claude, via Anthropic's partnership with defense contractor Palantir, was used in the US operation to capture Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, Amodei expresses discomfort publicly. It's a small moment, but it's the first crack, because Anthropic always said there were 2 things Claude would never be used for, 2 lines in the sand. The Pentagon said those 2 things were exactly what they needed. Keep that in mind, we'll come back to it. February 2026, the contract comes up for renegotiation. The Pentagon's new demand is clean and non-negotiable. Claude must be available for all lawful purposes, no exceptions, no carve-outs, no philosophy. Anthropic's position is equally clean. 2 exceptions stay, or there is no deal. Exception 1, Claude cannot be used to control fully autonomous weapon systems. Current AI is not reliable enough. An error in that context isn't a bug. It's a body count. Exception 2, Claude cannot be used for mass domestic surveillance of American citizens, not because it's illegal, but because existing law was written before AI could scan 1 million social media posts, cross-reference geolocation data, and build a behavioral profile of every American in a city in under an hour. February 24th, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth meets with Dario Amodei directly. The tone, sources say, is cordial. But the message is absolute. In his words, get on board or we invoke the Defense Production Act to force you. And if you still refuse, we designate you a national security risk. The formal deadline, 5:01 p.m., Friday, February 27th. February 26th, Amodei goes public. His statement is deliberate. Anthropic supports all lawful military use of AI. But on these 2 exceptions, in his words, we cannot in good conscience accede to their request. The Pentagon's response is a single line from a spokesperson, get on board or not. Now, I mentioned a staff memo. What Amodei wrote to his own employees after negotiations collapsed will tell you everything about why this deal really fell apart. And it comes down to one specific phrase the Pentagon tried to delete from the contract. You'll see exactly what that phrase is in a few minutes. But ask yourself, why would the Pentagon be fine with the entire contract except for one phrase? Near the end of negotiations, the Pentagon made one final offer. We'll accept all of Anthropic's terms if you delete 4 words. That phrase, analysis of bulk acquired data. In his internal memo leaked to the information and confirmed by the Financial Times, Amodei wrote that this exactly matched the scenario they were most worried about. They found that very suspicious. Bulk acquired data is a technical term for mass data collection. Social media posts, location pings, browser history, call metadata, the kind of data that already exists legally, the kind a sufficiently powerful AI model could process at a scale no human surveillance program ever could. The existing laws don't cover that. They weren't written for it. That's the phrase. That's the 7 words from the start of this video. The Pentagon didn't want to ban mass surveillance. They wanted to remove the specific language that would have prevented it. But here's where it gets legally strange. The Pentagon designates Anthropic a supply chain risk, a designation previously reserved for Huawei, for Kaspersky, for companies used by foreign adversaries to spy on the United States. And then, in the same breath, grants Anthropic a 6-month transition window to keep providing services to the Department of War. Former Justice Department liaison Katie Sweeten put it plainly, I don't know how you designate something a supply chain risk and then compel that same company to keep working for you. Anthropic's own legal team adds, Hegseth doesn't actually have the statutory authority to bar every military contractor from working with them. That threat, they say, is legally hollow. Now, OpenAI. Hours before the Friday deadline, Sam Altman posts publicly that his company shares Anthropic's red lines. Many read this as solidarity, then Anthropic is blacklisted, and within hours, OpenAI announces it has signed its own Pentagon deal. Altman admits it. The deal was, in his words, definitely rushed. The optics, he says, don't look good. Inside OpenAI, employees are furious. Many say they really respect Anthropic for holding the line. A Quit GPT campaign starts trending, and Claude, the model of the newly designated national security threat, surges to #1 on the Apple App Store. But the contract questions don't go away. Legal analyst Jessica Tillotman at George Washington University says OpenAI's published contract language does not give the company a freestanding right to override otherwise lawful government use. And researcher Mike Masnick points out the contract references Executive Order 12,333, the same order used by the NSA to tap communications outside US borders, capturing American citizens in the process and calling it legal. OpenAI didn't break the Pentagon's requirements. They found language the Pentagon could live with, and those are not the same thing. The deadline passes. Trump posts on Truth Social that the left-wing nut jobs at Anthropic have made a disastrous mistake trying to strong-arm the Department of War. Minutes later, Hegseth posts, Anthropic delivered a masterclass in arrogance and betrayal. America's warfighters will never be held hostage by the ideological whims of big tech. This decision is final. Anthropic is formally designated a supply chain risk to national security, lumped in with Huawei, with Kaspersky. American companies are prohibited from doing business with them. The $200 million contract, gone. FCC Chairman Brendan Carr goes on CNBC and says they were given lots of off-ramps. 8 hours after Hegseth's post, the United States launches strikes on Iran. Reports confirm Claude assists with intelligence analysis, target selection, and battle simulations for U.S. Central Command. The model Anthropic refused to hand over unconditionally, being used in those exact hours in an active war. Remember those 2 things Anthropic said Claude would never be used for? Autonomous weapons, mass surveillance. Anthropic said those were the lines. The Pentagon said those were exactly what they needed. And now you can see, this was never about a contract dispute. This was about who gets to decide what AI is allowed to do when it becomes a weapon. Map the aftermath, 3 companies, 3 outcomes, Anthropic blacklisted, 6-month exit window, IPO under threat, $380 billion valuation, but suddenly, every defense contractor in America is reassessing whether they can afford to keep working with them. OpenAI, rewarded, rushes a deal, becomes the primary classified AI partner going forward. Elon Musk's xAI. The Pentagon confirms they were on board with being in a classified setting, no negotiation required, no red lines, no delay. MIT Technology Review framed it cleanly. Anthropic pursued a moral approach that won it many supporters but failed, while OpenAI pursued a pragmatic and legal approach that is ultimately softer on the Pentagon. The moral credibility flows to the loser. The contract goes to the winner. As of March 5th, 2026, Amodei is back at the negotiating table. He's talking directly with Undersecretary Emil Michael, the same man who publicly called him a liar with a God complex just days earlier. The talks could succeed. A deal may still be reached. But here's what has already been decided, regardless of how those talks end. The US government has demonstrated for the first time that it will use a national security designation against an American company for enforcing its own safety standards, not for espionage, not for foreign entanglement. for drawing a line in a contract negotiation. The deeper problem was never about Claude. It was about this: can any private company maintain ethical control over its own technology once that technology becomes a weapon of the state? Anthropic's answer was yes. The Pentagon's answer was, you don't get to answer that question. Every AI company in America watched this happen in real time. They saw what Anthropic built. They saw what Anthropic stood for. They saw what it cost. And they saw what OpenAI got for moving fast and asking fewer questions. The model that got the contract wasn't the safest one. It was the most compliant one. That same model, the one Anthropic refused to hand over unconditionally, was running analysis on targets in Tehran, while its creator was being called a threat to the Republic. That's not a contradiction. That's the new law of AI.